Good evening. Thank you for joining us with our Lessons of Vietnam show. I am Bill Dixon. Co-host Bob Matthews, my co-host, will be joining us shortly. Thank you for tuning in to our show. The best way to tune in would be to give us a call at 919-518-9773, and then you can ask Bob or myself or our guest tonight questions. Even better way is to go to Skype and come on to Computers at COMPUTERS 2K Voice, VOICE, and join us live on the air. But be sure to call in and ask Joe questions. Joe Harsh is our guest tonight. He was a LERP. He's going to tell you all about being a LERP, what's going on with that. Bob will be asking him some in-depth questions, as Bob does. You can always tell Bob is a teacher because he has all these in-depth questions and so forth that for people to ask. Today is a special day, of course, day September 11th. We all remember what happened 12 years ago. I'd like for you to remember those who lost their lives and their families that were left behind as a result of the terrorist attack on different places, the 4 places that we were attacked in September 11th. Also, remember the young men and young women who are serving in our military today and their families who have been fighting these terrorists for the last 12 years. And especially remember the ones who've given everything and their families. What I've got going here, I also would like to tell you about September 20th. It's coming up. That was National POW MIA Day. North Carolina Vietnam veterans has met at the North Carolina State Capitol for the last 26 plus years, almost 27 now. The first Saturday every month at 12 o'clock noon. Rain, sleet, snow, hurricanes, whatever, we're there. But on September the 20th at 6 o'clock in the evening, we're going to be there to hold our POW MIA ceremony to be part of the National POW MIA Recognition Day. So we'd like for you to come join us. If you're in the area, come join us. If you're too far away to come join us, take a moment about 6 o'clock and think about those POWs and MIAs in all wars that are still there. We have one right now still missing in action from Afghanistan. Remember, we still have young men and women from this country dying in Afghanistan and fighting in Afghanistan. So remember them. Also, I'm going to remind you again, if you would, just come on the and go into chat 919-518-9773 and ask us some questions live. This show only works if you participate with us. And I'm going to turn it over to Bob Matthews now and let him talk with Joe. And I know you'll enjoy Joe. He's been a good friend of mine for years. He's Vice President of North Carolina Vietnam Veterans. He's got quite a story. So, Bob, come on in and join us, and we'll get things going.
Good evening, and welcome to Lessons of Vietnam. I'm Bob Matthews with my co-host Bill Dixon. We have a very special guest tonight, Mr. Joe Harsh. As Bill mentioned, right now he's the Vice President of North Carolina Vietnam Veterans. But more than that, Joe is a charter member of the Lessons of Vietnam course that we started 20 years ago with a small handful of veterans who had a story to tell. So without much further ado, Joe Harsh, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Bob. Appreciate being here.
Well, Joe, we've tried the last few weeks on the show is to take the viewers on a trip to Vietnam. The war had so much enormity to it, we decided to break it down into the war in the air, the war in the water, and the war on the ground. In our next couple of sessions, we're going to deal with the war at home, a multifaceted approach where we hope we can get the audience involved, and we'd like you to tell your story because it is so unique. I believe most viewers that study war or study history can identify with what we call the foot soldier, the ground pounder. So, Joe, let's go back a bit.
Okay.
Let's go back to a little town in Pennsylvania, Catasauqua, Pennsylvania.
Yeah, that was where I was born and raised. It was a town of about 7,000 people. and there was there was probably 8 or 10 of us that actually went to Vietnam over the years.
Well, Joe, could you tell us your story? Because we know, of course, you're a Vietnam veteran, but go back to the beginning. Getting into the service, your training, your basic, and how you got to Vietnam. Then we'll get into the ground war itself, actually what you did in Vietnam. But take us on a journey, if you would.
Well, I was first drafted, and then I took the option of a third year in the Army, so I wouldn't have to go in the infantry. Well, it ended up that I went off to Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, where I was trained as a radar technician. Then I went to a OCS school, which is a non-commissioned officer school, and we were trained in many ways of setting up in a jungle-type environment. We were actually trained as a ranger, and then I went to Vietnam. When I got to Vietnam, they sent me to a place called Phu Hep, which is up on the coast. I was about a 30-second walk from the beach, and it was the middle of the monsoon season, so it rained 24/7.
Oh, yeah.
And they said, I don't know why you're here, because GCA radar is run by our Air Force. So I sat around for, 20 days, and they gave me orders to go to Long Binh, which is about 30 miles, 25 miles from Saigon. Well, I got to Long Binh, and they informed me that they were glad to see me because they needed NCOs. I said, well, that's great. And they said, yeah, you can be the squad leader of a LRP unit. I says, LRP unit? Wait a minute. They says, oh, you'll learn quickly.
Oh, yes.
Which you have to do.
Oh, yes.
Now, a LRP unit is a unit of we go out on missions. Missions are there's no time limit to the missions.
I see.
We go out as 7 guys, maximum 7 guys, because there's only 8 can fit in a helicopter.
Sure.
And since 7 of us are carrying so much equipment, we only went out at 7 guys, so we get on one helicopter. My equipment averaged about 95 pounds that I had to carry on my person.
I see.
So to ask me to do it today, I'd probably say no. But back then, I was in pretty good shape.
Well, Joe, let me get back to the things you carried. Because, one of the things we like to do with Lessons of Vietnam is recommend reading for our students and for our adults that are learning more and more about Vietnam. As we reach the 50th anniversary of Vietnam, it seemed like it's reborn in the history books. Well, one of the books we recommend is Tim O'Brien's book, The Things They Carried. So for the benefit of the audience, would you go through the things you carried on your person? 90 pounds of what?
Well, it was mainly ammunition. I would carry 28 magazines for my M16 rifle. Then in your rucksack, what you would carry food, because we ate off our rucksack. You carried 1 extra pair of fatigues, as many socks as you could put in the rucksack, because your socks were always wet, and hand grenades, and then plus we carried ammunition for the M60 machine gun, which were 360 rounds per belt, starter belt. So we carried extra ammunition because our machine gunner couldn't. And all the cigarettes I could carry at that time.
I understand. Well, Joe, one of the avenues we explore a lot is the use of movies. And sometimes it shows the ground pounder, the grunt, as you were affectionately called, the people that did the dirty work, you might say, the frontline people in Vietnam. Well, when you see Bat-21 in movies like this, you see some of the movies depicted with the foot soldier in Vietnam, some scenes in Forrest Gump, how close are they to the truth and things you went through?
Some are good and some are bad. Obviously, Hollywood's not going to make you pay $20 for a ticket to see a soldier sitting around doing nothing.
Sure.
And there were days that we were actually, believe it or not, we were bored out in the field because there was no action, there's no going on. I think about that today and think, wow, you're going to get bored because you aren't shot at? That's crazy.
Yeah.
But you had a different attitude back then. And some of them were good and some were bad. The some of the movies like Apocalypse Now, I still don't know how that movie ended because I watched it 7 or 8 times and I never could get to the ending of it.
It never did.
Some of them are pretty decent, but there's a lot of Hollywood in every movie.
Well, Joe, when you get back to Vietnam, coming from a small town, as we said, Catasauqua, going to Vietnam, you mentioned a little bit about your training. When you look back now after several years and you evaluate your training, would you say you were well trained for Vietnam or you were undertrained?
I can't say I was undertrained because I came home, so I was doing something right. I can't say I was overtrained at all because I got into a position of leadership under a ground pounder position.
Right.
Luckily, I lucked out by having my replacement was on his second tour. So I followed him around. And the best words he gave to me was, when I stick a piece of gum in my mouth, you better know what flavor it is.
I understand. Well, one of the lessons, I think, of Vietnam that we've learned, I think, over the years is pay attention. We went into Vietnam, I think we went into it with a little bit of a superiority complex. Because we've studied war before, you and I, and it looks like maybe the tactics of warfare, where you engage the enemy, you take control of the situation, you fortify, you build a fort, you occupy, and then you leave. What happened in Nam to that strategy?
I think the problem is what came out of Washington. It wasn't the ground troops or the command on the ground. Washington had this superior attitude that once we go in and wipe out the enemy from an area, well, they'll just leave it and won't come back.
I see.
Well, that's not true. They were probably back in before the Americans actually left the area. So we had a problem with Washington running the war, and you can take that to many steps.
Yes, you can. One thing we've talked about before, and I think we do this out of respect, is the resiliency of the Vietnamese, the North, the South, the Viet Cong, the people themselves. As Bill has mentioned many times on the show, they have been at war for years and years and years, and they seem to not revel in it, but you seem like you can't defeat them. You can delay them. You can perhaps subdue them briefly, but they never go away. So when you left Vietnam and came home, and your tour of duty was when again, Joe?
December of 69 to December of 70.
Okay. When you came home, we still were engaged in Vietnam for another 3 good years. So when you came back home, what were your impressions of the South Vietnamese?
The South Vietnamese, to me, when I was over there, I respected them as troops, but I really didn't trust them. It was the American attitude that I don't trust anybody but another American.
I see.
But they put up a good battle for 3 years, and I think if they'd have been resupplied like our government promised them to be resupplied, I think you'd had a little bit of a turnout. I'm not saying the North would not have won,
I see.
but I think they could have dragged it out for a lot longer than they did.
Well, one thing we've talked about before is being on the ground in Vietnam. You had air support, you had sea support. We had at one time in Vietnam, probably right before you got there, between 68 and 69, over 500,000 troops in Vietnam, and really in South Vietnam. So if you could put your thumb on one thing, or maybe two things, that went wrong in Vietnam, where we got off course, with that many troops in that small of a nation, what happened?
We didn't fight a clearing war, what I say clearing war compared to World War II. We had no front line and we had no rear line. So we couldn't send our troops, after being in combat for a while, we couldn't send them to the rear because there was no rear.
I see.
So you had troops out there that our tour was 12 months, and at the end of 12 months, you were pretty tired.
Sure.
So, especially your ground troops. Now, you got to understand there was 10 non-combat troops to support every one troop. So out of the 500,000, you're only talking probably, 50,000
Sure.
combat troops. So it was a different type of war. We didn't go in and clear areas like you said we talked about before. We should have went in and cleared areas and put in a command post there
Sure.
to keep the enemy out. And training the South Vietnamese, I don't blame them one bit.
I understand.
If I get somebody else to do my fighting, I'll gladly let them do it. So the Vietnamese we had in a secondary role as our combat troops.
Well, Joe, one of the lessons, I believe, is hindsight. We can look back and look at Vietnam, as we've done many times, analyze the war, say many things went wrong, many things went right. But when we talk about the war on the ground, and these men are coming home, and we start to talk, and we get home, and there's really no outlet. There's no education of Vietnam. Most of our public was somewhat ignorant about Vietnam, why we went, what we did, why we left. So years ago when we started the Lessons of Vietnam, you were very instrumental in putting this course together. Why do you think it was so needed in our schools, and why do you think you enjoy teaching Vietnam throughout the nation?
Oh, I enjoy it tremendously. In fact, probably one of the mistakes in my lifetime was I never became a teacher. I think teaching the kids today is history repeats itself. I don't care what anybody says. You look over the years, but history repeats itself. And our kids need to know what we went through in Vietnam and how it was in Vietnam. To sit back and think that, you take an a pilot in Vietnam, he can get shot down and survive, but he has a full belly full of food. He's clean.
Yes.
Because he had a shower the night before. But that poor grunt in the ground, we ate sea rations, if anybody knows what a sea ration is. They're not the most delectable items in the world. And we were dirty. We never could shave or shower or anything else out in the field. So with that kind of attitude, you get that sixth sense, is what I say, the animalistic sense, to where you're living almost like an animal out there in the field.
Well, like you were telling some of the students last year, we were talking, and we do speak all over the country on Lessons of Vietnam. You were taking some of the students with you on a mental trip where you were saying you missed a full year of your life. A calendar year just wiped out. You talked about showers, you talked about hot food. You tried to put them in Vietnam. I think it worked. So I'm going to put you now on the spot, Mr. Harsh. I have a six-pack of questions for you, straight from Pittsburgh. An Iron City six-pack.
Ugh.
I know. The Pirates won their 82nd game, by the way. Here we go, Joseph. When you think about Vietnam, and you've been home a long time, of course, can you give me the one thing about Vietnam that changed your life?
Oh, I went over at age 19.
I see.
So you're not thinking about life in the future at that point. You just, you're thinking about probably your next date or maybe your next touchdown. But coming back from Vietnam, you get a whole feeling about life. Life is so much different when you come back. It's so much more rewarding to be able to say that I'm alive today and I'll probably be alive tomorrow, which in Vietnam we didn't have that option. Your forward thoughts were, I hope to see the sun set in the morning, and at sunrise, I hope I see the sunrise in the morning. So you have a different attitude on life, and you turn into a street kid, really. I came from a small town. I had no idea of being what a big city kid was like.
I understand.
So you become a street kid. You value the things in life.
Well, Joe, you've been very instrumental in teaching Vietnam and sharing your story on the show tonight, but for years and years and years. And a few years ago, in fact, 3 years ago, we went back to Vietnam. The Ridgebacks' first trip, we took 11 people back to Vietnam. Some were like you, some were ground pounders, some were behind the scenes. And as you mentioned before, it seemed like the brotherhood was constant. A Vietnam vet is a Vietnam vet. So when you go back to Vietnam after 40 plus years, what were your impressions and how did the trip back affect you?
I was all fired up to go back for months and months and months.
Yes, you were.
As we strayed out. As I got on that airplane to fly over there, I got very apprehensive. I thought, how are these people going to treat me when I get off that airplane? Are they going to think about maybe the uncle or the cousin that I killed when I was over there? How are they going to treat me? And it just really got me. When I got off the airplane, it was so much different because I didn't have the constant smell of diesel fuel that we all had when we were over there.
I understand.
And it seemed to me, for some reason, the heat wasn't as bad. I saw no mosquitoes when I was there. First time I was over, the mosquitoes had tail numbers. They were so big. So it was a different story. The infrastructure didn't change much. You still have 500 wires hanging from the telephone pole to where if you want electricity, you just go out and plug into it,
Yeah, I understand.
which is strange. But the attitude is very Western. The southern Vietnamese are very Westernized, and they really don't want communism, to tell you the truth. The communists didn't do anything for them.
No.
So it was strange to think that way and to feel like that the North Vietnam did not infiltrate into the South at all.
So would you say, Mr. Harsh, that free enterprise is alive and well in
Oh,
South Vietnam?
God, yes, it is. There was, from Long Binh to Saigon, which I used to travel quite a bit because I had to turn in a report every time I came off a mission in Saigon. It was basically rice paddies. There was nothing between for the 23 or 25 miles. Now it's all condominiums, and we're talking big time condominiums,
Yes,
400,000 a month condominiums, or 400,000 a year condominiums. So I mean, it's changed quite a bit. The young Vietnamese have really took the entrepreneurship seriously.
Ooh, that's a pretty big word, buddy.
I use big words occasionally.
Yes, you do. Now, Joe, let me ask you this, okay? We talked before about we named our course The Lessons of Vietnam, and of course there are many, many lessons of Vietnam. And each time we have a guest on the show, we ask them to come up with what they think would be the number one lesson that students today in high school and college would learn from studying Vietnam. So I'll put you on the spot, Mr. Harsh. What is your number one lesson of the Vietnam conflict?
Number one lesson is treat our present GIs as real people. They're the ones out there fighting for you. Freedom is not free, and somebody has to fight for it. So when I say support your troops when they come home. Don't throw things at them like stuff was thrown at us.
Excellent point.
No matter who ran the war, whether it was Washington, it wasn't the GI on the ground. I was there taking orders from somebody, and I took it that it was my job, and I went and did it as a job. And so I think the number one thing to learn from Vietnam was, treat your troops at a better deal. I think number two was there's going to be Vietnams all over the world.
You can just have one, Joe.
Oh, I'm sorry.
One lesson. I'm just kidding. But Joe, when we talk about Vietnam, and there's so much comes out, there's so much information. We call them hotspots. Different things come up, and people have instant impressions. So what I'm going to do with you now is play a little bit of word association. I'm going to give you a place, a name, or a personality. And I'd like you to give a comment, being a Vietnam veteran and being a veteran teacher of Vietnam, how these people are portrayed. I will start with everyone's sweetheart, Jane Fonda.
Traitor, should have been hung, should have been shot.
Thank you. Lyndon Johnson.
Lyndon Johnson was a figure. That was it. He didn't want anything to do with Vietnam, and he got out of it pretty quickly.
A man that I had met before, you knew this, but over there he was kind of like the main man, William Westmoreland.
William Westmoreland was a great general. I don't think he did such a good job in Vietnam. That's my attitude. That's my opinion. He put a head count on his troops for bodies, and it was like playing a basketball game. And sometimes it got out of hand.
Well, Joe, another man that's received a lot of acclaim and a lot of criticism for his role in Vietnam is a man we have been in contact with, is William Calley of the My Lai incident. What's your thoughts there on William?
I'm probably have a different attitude about William Calley. I thought William Calley was used as a pawn, that his commanding officer was I can't remember the guy's name.
Ernest Medina.
Medina.
Yes.
Medina was known by the troops as Madman Medina.
Madman Medina, right.
And I think he forced Calley into a situation that he wasn't in. I went through the My Lai area. It was after My Lai, But I went through the My Lai area, and my troops, a soldier goes from point A to point B in the straightest line that he can, because we're basically all lazy. So what we did is we would bypass My Lai because it was a VC, NVA sympathizing area.
Yes.
So we instead of getting the small arms fire, I think we would just bypass that area. So I have a different attitude about My Lai. Okay. I think My Lai I think Calley got set up, and his reaction to it was not good by starting shooting civilians. What he should have done was just had all the civilians get off their feet. Okay. So it goes back to training. I don't think Calley was a well-trained troop, and his commanding officers were not very well trained either.
But we have some teaching points now, Joe. You've been to this area of D.C. as much as I have, but what are your impressions of the wall at D.C.?
The wall is something that's above and beyond reality. People go to the wall, which happens to be the most visited monument in Washington. People go to the wall that were never in Vietnam, and once they learn about it, how it is, and how the names are put up there, they get a different respect for it. For a Vietnam veteran, he goes up there and he sees a name, and he sees a face.
Sure.
And the faces aren't looking at you and I. The faces are 18, 19, 20-year-old guys. So we can relate to the face. We know they're still there. We talk to them. Now, whether you think that's crazy or not, you can do that. But we can talk to those guys, and a lot of us leave notes to them. And they're brothers. They'll always be brothers.
Well, Joe, you've had the privilege, I would say, to speak on Vietnam around the nation, in Wake County, all the way to Seattle, Washington. And I know you were involved in the early phase of the Lessons of Vietnam when it was started at Enloe High School. What are your impressions of students today?
I think the kids of today are not the bad kids we think about. The kids that get all the news and all the hyper shooting and stabbings and all that other stuff, they're a small minority, because we very rarely see these kids in our course due to the fact that our course is an elective, and it's being taught by some great teachers who hold these kids to a high standard as far as grades go. It's not a course that you take and say, hey, I'll get my C and go home. It don't work that way. And the speakers will go in, and the speakers aren't going to treat you that way. So I think the kids of today are much better than people think they are. I think they're our future leaders. Can't get around that. They're our future soldiers. You can't get around that.
Well, Joe, one of the lessons of Vietnam, as you mentioned earlier, was to take the knowledge that we have and let the students in Vietnam and the United States build a bridge between each other and understand what happened a long time ago and make sure it never happens again. But when you're asked to fight for freedom in a foreign country and you do that, I think you build a rapport with that nation that lasts forever. Could you give the audience your impressions of the philosophy of the Bridge Back?
Well, the Bridge Back is to touch back with Vietnam. And it's not that I owe Vietnam a thing, because I felt like I paid my price in my 12 months over there. But what we're doing is we're trying to teach the kids. The kids are the answer to the world's problems. I don't care what anybody says. Old guys like you and I are not going to change the world's philosophy. We're embedded with certain things. But if I can change the kids' philosophy to where the West is not a bunch of villains or killers, and by giving them something that every kid in the United States has is a playground, if I can give them a playground and to show them there are fun times in this world and there's good times in this world, and that Americans are not a bunch of killers and baby killers and whatever we were called, that's my impression of going back and giving Vietnam something back. A lot of the money that when we go back on our trips comes out of our own pockets,
yes,
which a lot of people don't realize that. Most of our donations go to the playgrounds and building the playground equipment. So we take money out of our own pockets. And if I can turn one kid around in Vietnam to believing that the West is not a bad place, that I'd like to maybe live there or negotiate with them, teach them, when they throw dirt in my face, I'll be one happy person.
Well, I'd like to thank you, Joe, for more. We're not quite done yet, but I want to invite the audience to take advantage of our special guest, Mr. Harsh, and give us a call at 919-518-9773 if you have any questions for Mr. Harsh or myself. And before I turn Joe back over to Bill Dixon, we have a couple more comments I'd like you to deal with, Joe. And one is a sticker, a bumper sticker, a window decal that we have used for years is the POW MIA issue. Now, Bill mentioned earlier, this is a special day in America, remembering 9/11. It's also a special day when we think about those who did not come back. So what are your viewpoints on the POW MIA constant search?
Well, I believe that there are no live POWs left in Vietnam. Personal opinion. Their remains need to be returned. They need to be buried in our soil, and that should be an option by this country to hold close to the heart.
Yes.
If we send somebody overseas to fight for us, then damn it, we should respect to bring them back if they're a casualty or a POW. The POW we have today from Afghanistan, I wish Washington would get off their butts and bring this man home. There's no reason not to bring this guy home.
Bill Bergdahl. Yes.
There's no reason for him to sit back and negotiate with the guys in Guantanamo. Is ridiculous. It's totally ridiculous. We are the number one nation in this world. I don't care what anybody says. We are the number one nation. Damn it, let's go bring them home and not wage, parts of it. If they want 5 or 10 from Guantanamo to be sent back in exchange for them, send them. Send them back. What do we care? 10 of them aren't going to rush this country. 10 of them couldn't even live in Raleigh. I'll guarantee you that.
Okay.
The vets will be all over them like, never mind. Go ahead.
I think that's very clear. Now, Joe, looking back at Vietnam and what you did in Vietnam on the ground and where we've developed so far, the rapport in the United States, before I turn you over to Mr. Dixon, any regrets looking back? I know it was a big part of your life. It still is a big part of your life. One of the questions that I usually ask my guests on the show and in the classroom is, when were you last in Vietnam? And most people say last night.
Yeah.
So, Joe, any regrets?
Not really. I don't have any regrets. One of my regrets is that the country treated us the way we did when we came back from Vietnam, because I lived underground for 10, 15 years.
I understand.
And so that was my only regret. As far as my regret fighting in a war, I have none. None whatsoever. I met some great guys. I've lost some great guys. And unfortunately, my only regret was that we have a wall with 58,000 names on it.
Well, Joe Harsh, from Bob Matthews and many of the veterans, this course, Lessons of Vietnam, would be nowhere where it is today without men like you.
Thank you.
And I thank you. And Mr. Dixon.
Well, Joe, Bob and I like to double team our guest, and again, appreciate you being here tonight with us. We talked a little bit about being a LRP. What exactly does a LRP do? I mean, tell me a little bit about what you did when you were out there in the jungle. How many were? You mentioned there was 6 or 7 of you. What exactly was your job? Was you go out there and shoot up the bad guys, or just what were you supposed to do?
Well, most people think when I say LRP, they think of a little lizard crawling around that goes LRP, LRP, LRP. That's not it. It's a bunch of guys that were sent out on certain missions, on certain goals to areas. We went out at 6 or 7 soldiers due to the fact there was a helicopter could only carry 8 infantry guys, and since we carried so much equipment with us, we were a little heavier than a normal squad. So we used to go out from 6 or 7. We would go into an area and look for the enemy, either NVA or VC. We'd find out what they were carrying, what material they were moving, and you would learn, like you would learn in high school or college, by if they were carrying a lot of rice, that means they were going to go in and support a unit that's already there. They were carrying ammunition, that means they were going into a bigger group and probably going to attack an American outpost. So you would go in. Did we make contact? We tried not to. We had very little firepower. With 6 guys, you don't fight too many groups. So we would not look to get in combat, but it happens though. It happens.
So your job was basically to gather information and give it to the guys back to make plans and so forth, whatever they were going to do.
Yeah, our information would go to a S2 operation, which is basically an operations outfit, and they would take our information and pass it on to the line troops.
I imagine with 6 guys out in the middle of the jungle at night, surrounded by bad guys, get kind of lonesome sometimes.
Yeah, it was lonesome, but you couldn't get too lonesome because, if we're looking for Charlie out there, then Charlie's looking for us too, and Charlie had LRP units too. So it was funny that it only happened to me once where my LRP unit bounced into another LRP unit, and we had a good little battle. But it was, you had to be on your toes 24 hours a day, 7-11. You were on your toes, 7/24, and you had to worry about what was going on, and you couldn't rest on your laurels.
Well, I know as a LRP, it was one of the things that we've known each other for a long time. We've shared stories and so forth, and you had Long Bend, same a few years after I was, and I know it changed quite a bit. But it's another thing you did as a LRP that we officially never went into Cambodia, I believe, but I understand you were there. Tell us about it.
Well, we officially did go into Cambodia. I mean, we made the push. I believe it was the 1st of May we went in, and don't jump on me for dates, but I think it was the 1st of May we were reconnaissance in Cambodia to do the sweeping mission for the Cambodian push. The Cambodian push started, I believe, the 14th of May. And we went in and reconned the area, so the Vietnamese came into the Parrot's Beak area, where the country looks like a Parrot's Beak jutting into the river. And we went in and reconned what they call the Fishhook area, was for the Americans. The Fishhook area had the 25th Division on one side of the river, and they did the push militarily, and the 11th Armored Cav, which we were pulled back in Cambodia. But we were there for 14 days, and we found one of the biggest caches was there. Was the way we found it was, I was looking through my field glasses one day over a small area, and all of a sudden this tree toppled over. Two North Vietnamese guys come out from under the tree, and the tree stood back up again. Am I crazy, or is this a cache? And it ended up being a cache.
Now, how long were you? That I think you from the 1st to the 14th when the big guys came in, about 2 weeks there. Of course, every night you had a hot meal and a nice hot shower and so forth while you were out there.
Where were you? No, we didn't have hot showers, and we didn't have hot meals. The push kind of went past us, and we set up almost like a night division type operation to where we were going to be extracted back to Vietnam, to our base camp. Well, what happened is there was so much ammunition and rice, tons of rice being pulled out of Cambodia, and bodies, that every helicopter that was flying out of Cambodia was loaded with equipment. So I couldn't get a ride home. So we ended up being there for almost 4 more weeks, which would have made the mission just about 6 weeks long. The only water we had to drink was flown in what they called blivets, which was a big black inner tube type thing they would sling load under a helicopter. Well, the North Vietnamese knew that if that's the only water they could get in, let's shoot it up. So they had less water. And by the time the blivet was set down, it had many holes in it. So it was probably half full. So we ended up having only water to drink. No showers, no nothing. You got pretty rank.
I imagine you smelled pretty good after several weeks of, especially over there with 100 and some degrees and 100% humidity and so forth. But I understand probably everybody out with you also had a little bit of
well,
smell.
they say you only stink when you can smell yourself. And God, after probably fourth week, I start smelling myself a lot.
Yeah. Okay. Another story that we've talked about a little bit. When you went back to Long Bend, the perimeter road that went around Long Bend had guard bunkers all the way through, and from my time there, I found out early on that a lot of the guards in the guard duty bunkers out there, the first responders to attack or whatever, had no training or didn't know what they were doing at all. And I understand back 2 or 3 years later when you were there that hadn't changed a whole lot. Tell me about the nights you were on guard duty with the newbies.
The rookies?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was on guard duty. I was called a sector sergeant, and I would be in charge of like 4 or 5 bunkers. Well, what they would do in my bunker, since I was the only senior guy out in the line, that they would put 3 rookies with me. Total days in country was probably like 8 days totally with all 3 of them. So what you had to do is every hour, every 2 hours, you had to call in on the radio and do a commo check, communications check, making sure that the radio was working fine. Well, I told the guys, I said, look, I'm going into the bed here, and I'm going to sleep. You guys are going to call in every 2 hours. Well, after about 2 hours, I said, one of the guys woke me and said, Sarge. He says, I think I hear something out in the bunker. Out in the line, I mean, not in the bunker, out in the line. And I says, well, pop off a flare. Well, he said, I don't know how to do that. So I get up, and I grab the flare, and what you did was you popped it over and just banged it with the bottom of your hand, and a flare would go up. Well, a flare went up, and I looked out. I had a sapper, which was kind of like a suicide guy. He was in the 3rd string of concertina wires, just about ready to break into my bunker. I had another one in the 2nd string, and I had a 3rd one in the 1st string of wire. Well, I said, open up with the machine gun. Well, the 2 of the kids were on the ground crying. The 3rd kid says, I don't know how to shoot this thing. So I pushed him back, and I opened up with the M60 machine gun. The first guy in the 3rd string, he went off. He detonated. The second guy, afterwards, we found with, like, I think 22 bullet holes in him. And the 3rd guy, I got him, but there was only a blood trail. So that's the kind of stuff he went through. Traumatically, it was tough. You know, adrenaline-wise, I was pumping. And so it was more, and you're talking, Bill, you're talking about a 19, 20-year-old kid that I was. So you had to grow up real fast.
Going back to Long Bend, when I was there was 55,000 troops. It was the largest military installation in the world. And there you would think it's probably the safest place you could be in Vietnam, even though you did have a little situation with the bunker duty. But I understand that you kind of got injured back at Long Bend where it was safe with the RIMPs.
Yeah, I was unfortunate enough. We came out of the field, and I went, which you usually do, you usually go to sleep, and a 122 millimeter rocket hit right next to my hooch, and it blew up. The guy that was walking in the door to hooch when it went off said he saw my body hit the ceiling, and then he was blown out the door. Well, 18 hours later, I was out for 18 hours. 18 hours later, I found myself in the 3rd Field Hospital in Saigon, paralyzed from the waist down. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. And what they said was either you hit the ceiling and you hurt your spine, or you hit the floor and hurt your spine, or whatever. Well, I was laying there for 3 days in the hospital, and the third day I woke up and something strange was happening. My toes were going like this. So I thought, oh, this is something new. So I wiggled out of bed and limped up to the nurse's station, and the nurse was a big major. She was a big girl. I would not have messed with her. She was a big girl. And I says, excuse me, ma'am. I says, I need a cigarette. And she says, you can't walk? I says, yes, ma'am, I just walked from my bed. I need a cigarette. Well, the conclusion was either I had a blood clot in my spine or just a major bruise in my spine, which showed that I was going to be paralyzed from the waist down. And what my big mistake was is that day I was supposed to be shipped to Japan, and that's the day I got up and walked. So 2 weeks later, I was back out in the field.
Did you get a Purple Heart?
No, I turned my Purple Heart down due to the fact that my mother went through 2 wars, World War II, put 3 brothers and a husband through World War II. And to me, Vietnam was on TV every night, and she didn't need the stress. So I turned it down so she wouldn't be notified that I was wounded.
All right. Now you're out of the service, and what'd you do when you came back? Did you go to school, or?
I did nothing for a month, and I mean nothing. I would sleep all day and party all night. And then I finally decided, well, the money's running out from what I got out of the Army with. I better get either a job or go to school. My brother offered me to live with him out in Oklahoma and go to the school in Oklahoma. And I probably wanted to play some football. So I went to Oklahoma and lived with my brother for 2 years and played some football at Oklahoma.
All right. You had, how old were you then?
Jeez, just turned 21.
You were 21, but you were much older because of what
Oh.
you'd been through and so forth. How did you relate to the students who got right out of high school and never really done anything besides come from high school right into college? How did you relate to those?
I didn't relate to them at all. I basically hated college. I would go to the cafeteria, and we had round tables with 4 chairs to it. And most of the time, if you went like at lunchtime, 12 o'clock, the cafeteria was pretty full. And there would be people waiting with their trays for a seat to open up. And I would have 3 empty seats at my table, and nobody would sit with me. They thought I was crazy. I had what I didn't know at the time, but I had what they called a 1,000-meter stare, which means my eyes were like doll's eyes or shark's eyes, to where I would be looking at you, but I'd be looking right through you, and that scared people. Scared a lot of people. So no, I didn't enjoy college.
Did you have teachers who spoke about the war in Vietnam, or?
No, I didn't run into any of them. I'm sure there were some very liberal teachers out there that would be anti-war. Fortunately, I didn't run into them. Now, fortunately for me or fortunately for them, I don't know to this day, because I didn't run into them. But I would have stood up for the troops, definitely.
Okay. You served honorably in Vietnam. What? I understand you got a couple medals. Tell us what you got.
I was awarded 3 Army Commendation Medals,
Okay.
which was due to doing above and beyond your job title. And I got a Purple Heart with not a Purple Heart, Bronze Star with a V for valor for my Cambodian insertion. I was awarded the Bronze Star with a V.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we appreciate all your service over there and winning those awards and so forth. It means you had to be doing something. Let me kind of go back into a little bit in-depth question here. Do you feel we defeated communism by our insertion into Vietnam?
Yeah, we did. If we did nothing else in Vietnam, we stopped communism, because communism never went on to Cambodia, never went on to Laos, it never went on to Thailand. which what our theory was, the domino theory, was that Vietnam would fall, Cambodia would fall, Thailand would fall. And we needed that for the Pacific Rim to secure Southeast Asia. Well, we did stop communism. We stopped it right in its tracks. Did we win the war? Probably not, because the North Vietnamese is still in control of the South. So, but we did stop communism. Dead in its tracks, we stopped communism.
Okay. All right. Do you think that I believe you already told Bob that you would probably go back and do it again if it was called on to do?
Yeah, but I think the enemy would have to land at Carolina Beach, and I'd have to have a Jeep because I can't walk anymore. But I would fight them. If I have to fight them from a Jeep, I'd fight them. Sure, no problem.
Now, when you came back and you went back to college and you graduated from school there, and how much did you talk about being a Vietnam veteran with your family, with people you met? Did it ever come up, or?
Well, it really never came up because I didn't bring it up. I was kind of like underground for years, and I have a divorced wife that never even knew I was in Vietnam. I got a situation. We were sitting at a dinner party one night in my living room, and one of the guys was with the Houston SWAT team previously. He wasn't with them then, but he was previously with them. And he says, "You don't know what it's like being shot at." And I casually said, "Yeah, I do." He said, "What do you mean?" I was a recon man in Vietnam. I says, a bullet coming at you looks like the top of a trash can. That's how big it looks. I said, "So don't tell me I was never shot at." And he just immediately shut up, and the conversation changed away from Vietnam. And that's the way it was. Nobody wanted to talk about it.
Well, if I remember correctly, you had a little situation on an airline flight with a flight attendant?
Yeah, when I got, I'll never forget, it was TWA Airlines, which don't exist anymore. Ha ha. But I got on the plane, and the stewardess came up to me and says, "Hey, soldier, how you doing?" I says, "Fine, ma'am." Now, she says, where you coming from?" Now, here's a guy with a GI haircut, a tan that's three shades deeper than anybody laying on the beach in California, and I had my uniform on. And I says, "Well, I'm coming from Vietnam." She says, "From Vietnam?" I said, "Yeah, I'm going." Or she's asking where I'm going. I says, "I'm going home to Pennsylvania." And she says, "Where are you coming from?" And I says, "Vietnam." And she says, "We really don't want you back. You were baby killers, and we don't want you back." And she walked away from me. Never served me on that airplane. Never served me one drink, one peanut, or anything on that airplane. In fact, that's when you would get fed on an airplane. Another stewardess brought me my meal.
You later joined North Carolina Vietnam Veterans Incorporated. What made you kind of come out of the closet, so to speak?
It was probably you guys that made me come out of the closet. I was told by a friend in Smithfield, that's where I'm from, that they had a NCVVI existed. I went there, signed up, and you guys are probably my best friends I ever had in my life.
Well, all right. Hello, who's this online? Hello? If you come back on, let us know. We couldn't hear you. So if you were talking, we couldn't hear you at all. So if you want to try again, go ahead and try again. We'd love to have you on, but we're running short on time. So come on back as soon as you can. Love to have you come on and ask Joe questions or whatever, question stories or whatever. Just to bring you up to date, our next show is still Vietnam on the Ground. We have a very special guest for our next show 2 weeks from now. His name is Hein Vo. He was a major on Vietnamese Rangers. A lot of the Vietnamese, when towards the end of the war, the soldiers took their uniforms off and went and hid. He followed right up until the last day. He was captured and put into a re-education camp for 8 years. And they did a lot of things, and he really, better than most people, understands what communism is and the bad things about communism. He came to America shortly after he got out of re-education camp, and is very active in the former South Vietnamese military here. He's a good friend of North Carolina Vietnam veterans, very instrumental with helping us raise funds to build a playground that we're going to do back in Dong Ha this coming May. So be sure and tune in. Tell all your friends. I think you'll really enjoy the show. He's quite a speaker. Joe, again, we appreciate you being here. And as always, we're going to be going off this weekend together to Greensboro to work with the Vietnamese military. Greensboro, that's what I thought. What did I say?
Greenberg.
Okay, Greenberg. Okay, Greensboro. My southern tongue sometimes has the problem with saying some words. It's,
my Yankee hearing isn't too good either.
Well, that's got something to do with it too. But
Charles here in Raleigh is saying, sorry that happened to you, Joe. People can be ignorant and stupid.
Good comment.
Appreciate the comment, John. I'm sorry you couldn't get it in on your own. We'd like to have had you do it, but appreciate you going through the extra trouble. Okay. Well, that was our show for tonight. We'll be back again in 2 weeks. If you missed one of the earlier shows, be sure and go online and look at them. They were recorded. The next time you tune in, go to Computers 2K Voice. That's COMPUTERS 2, the letter 2, K Voice. That's Skype. And be part of our show. Come in, ask questions. You can be on the air. Give us a call like Charlotte did at 919-518-9773. And if you're really bashful, just come on the computer at NissanCommunications.com and go to the chat function and type in your question. Either way, we'll look forward to participating with you next show.
Ask the person who just called to call again.
Charlie, if you can hear this.
Somebody else.
Oh, somebody else called. I'm sorry. Somebody else called. How about trying to try in and calling again? As us Southerners says, moan back.
Moan back.
That's what we used to. I used to tell the mule when I was trucking tobacco. Moan back.
Moan back.
Yeah, right.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. Our weekly lineup of call-in programs includes Computers 2K Now with Amnon Nissan, Sundays, 9 a.m. till noon. Carrie's Psychic Cafe with Carrie Silkowski, Sundays, 8 till 9 p.m. Health In with Debbie Bruck, Mondays, 11 a.m. till noon. Breaking Free with Marilyn Shannon, Mondays, 1 till 2 p.m. Lessons of Vietnam with NCVVI members the second and fourth Wednesday of each month from 7:30 till 8:30 p.m. Reawaken Your Brilliance with Julie Seibert, Wednesdays, 9 till 10 p.m. And if you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it at www.nissancommunications.com. Sponsored by ThatVidBlasterGuy.com, CarolinaApparel.com, and DeltaForce.net.